Before multi-track studios became standard, before producers were treated as architects, not technicians, there was George Martin, standing between four restless musicians and the limits of 1960s technology. The Beatles didn't just write songs, they forced the studio to evolve. Tape machines were pushed beyond design. Orchestras were treated like sound effects. Mistakes became innovations. George Martin later admitted, "These songs didn't just change the Beatles, they helped create modern music production itself." This is where that transformation begins. Number 10. All You Need Is Love, 1967.
Nothing you can do that can't be done. Nothing you...
All You Need Is Love wasn't just a song. It was a live experiment in global broadcasting, and George Martin was responsible for making sure it didn't collapse on air. The track was performed for Our World, the first live satellite television broadcast, reaching an estimated 400 million viewers worldwide. There was no safety net, no second take. Martin had to coordinate a hybrid performance, a pre-recorded backing track combined with live vocals, live orchestra, and spontaneous studio chaos. The production challenge was unprecedented: a 13-piece orchestra, multiple microphones, live tape synchronization, and a band known for improvisation under pressure. Martin structured the session like a controlled risk. The basic rhythm track was recorded in advance, allowing him to stabilize the broadcast technically. Over that foundation, Lennon's lead vocal, the orchestra, and the famous closing sing-along were performed live. The studio itself became a performance space. Guests, movement, noise, all carefully managed without killing the energy. Even the song's unconventional elements mattered: the opening French national anthem, the shifting time signatures, the layered chaos at the end. Martin didn't polish them away. He framed them. This wasn't just producing a record. It was producing a moment, live, global, and irreversible. George Martin later pointed to this session as proof that production was no longer about capturing music. It was about designing systems where creativity could survive technical limits. Modern live broadcasts, hybrid performances, and studio stage integrations all trace a line back to this night, not because it was perfect, but because it worked, when failure was visible to the entire world. Number 9. Yesterday, 1965.
All my troubles seem so far.
Yesterday appeared simple, too simple, almost dangerously so, by the standards of a rock band in 1965. One vocal, one acoustic guitar, and a string quartet. For the Beatles, this was a deviation. For George Martin, it was a risky but visionary production decision.
Now it looks as though they're here to stay.
Paul McCartney arrived with nothing more than the song and a guitar. No drums, no bass, no signature Beatles vocal harmonies. Martin immediately understood that adding a full band would destroy the song's emotional core. The solution was not technology, but orchestration. Martin wrote the string quartet arrangement with strict classical discipline. No excessive vibrato, no romantic indulgence. The strings were clean, cool, and controlled, serving as emotional support, not a replacement for the band.
Oh, I believe in yesterday.
His most important decision was what he chose not to do. No solo, no dramatic climax, no attempt to make it sound rock. In production terms, Yesterday shattered the assumption that a pop record had to feature the entire band. For the first time, the name The Beatles was attached to a recording that was effectively a solo performance, released without apology or explanation.
Had to go, no, no.
Martin understood that the studio was more than a recording space. It was a space of legitimacy. By approving this format, he opened the door for classical instruments to function as structural elements in modern pop, not decorative ones. After Yesterday, pop ballads were no longer bound to electric guitars and drums. This production set a new standard. Silence could be power, limitation could be identity, and the greatest courage of a producer could be knowing when to step aside. George Martin did not add something new. He removed everything, until only the song remained, and the world listened. Number 8. I Am the Walrus, 1967.
As you are he, as you are me, and we are all together.
I Am the Walrus was not written to be understood. It was written to overwhelm. John Lennon brought chaos into the studio. Nonsense lyrics, shifting sections, and a deliberate refusal to make sense. What turned that chaos into a finished record was George Martin's willingness to abandon conventional orchestral logic.
See how they run like pigs from a gun, see how they fly.
This was not an orchestra used for beauty. It was an orchestra used as disruption. Martin scored the strings, brass, and choir in sharp, aggressive bursts. Instead of smooth harmonic support, the orchestra intruded, cutting across the track with stabs, glissandos, and clustered voices that felt almost hostile. Classical instruments were no longer elevating the song. They were mocking it.
Sitting on a cornflake.
The recording itself was a technical gamble. The song was built from multiple sections recorded separately, then stitched together live during the final mix. Martin coordinated the orchestra while simultaneously blending a live radio broadcast of King Lear into the track, printed directly onto the monomaster. Once it was there, it could never be removed. This was production as commitment. No safety net. No undo button. The decision to fuse Shakespearean dialogue with a psychedelic rock song was not novelty. It was a statement. The studio was no longer just a place to capture performance. It was a compositional instrument in its own right. Martin treated Lennon's absurdism with complete seriousness. He did not attempt to clarify the song's meaning. Instead, he amplified its instability. The orchestra became part of the joke, part of the menace, and part of the confusion. With I Am the Walrus, modern music production crossed a line. Arrangements no longer had to explain the song. They could destabilize it. George Martin did not impose order. He engineered madness, precisely, deliberately, and forever locked into tape. Number 7. Come Together, 1969.
Flat top he come, grooving up slowly.
Come Together is one of George Martin's clearest examples of the Beatles functioning as a complete system rather than as individual writers. Each member contributed a distinct element, and Martin's role was to prevent those elements from colliding. John Lennon arrived with a minimal, rhythm-driven song. The lyrics were abstract and secondary. The structure was intentionally sparse. Martin recognized that this track would fail if overproduced. The solution was control and restraint. Paul McCartney's bass line became the track's anchor. Recorded prominently and mixed forward, it carried both rhythm and melody. Martin allowed the bass to dominate the low end, an unusual choice at the time, because it gave the song weight without adding harmonic clutter. Ringo Starr's drum part was equally decisive. The laid-back, almost dragging groove defined the track's identity. Martin avoided tightening the timing or polishing the performance. The slight looseness was preserved because it created tension and attitude. George Harrison's contribution was precision rather than volume. His guitar lines were minimal, processed, and placed carefully in the stereo field. Nothing competed for attention. Every sound had a defined function. From a production standpoint, Come Together is about balance. No orchestration, no studio spectacle, just selective emphasis. Martin shaped the mix so that silence, space, and texture mattered as much as notes. This is why Martin often cited the song as a personal favorite. It demonstrated how 4 different musical instincts, writing, rhythm, tone, and feel, could coexist without compromise. Come Together did not rely on innovation, it relied on discipline, and that discipline is what made the record powerful. Number 6, In My Life, 1965.
He says, I remember all my life.
In My Life marked a turning point in how classical structure could be integrated into pop without overpowering it. George Martin's most important contribution was not arrangement, but interpretation. The song itself was simple and reflective. Lennon's vocal carried the narrative. The band performance was restrained by design. What the track needed was contrast, something to elevate it without changing its character.
Forever, not for better.
Martin solved this with a piano solo inspired by Bach-style counterpoint. Rather than performing it as written, he recorded the piano at half speed. When played back at normal speed, the result sounded like a harpsichord, bright, precise, and slightly unreal. This was not a gimmick, it was a production solution. A real harpsichord would have altered the tone of the song and tied it too closely to period music. The sped-up piano kept the sound modern, while borrowing the discipline of classical phrasing.
Some have gone, and some remain.
Importantly, the solo does not dominate the track. It appears once, briefly, and then disappears. Martin resisted expanding it or repeating the idea. The restraint ensured the focus stayed on the song's emotional core. From a production perspective, In My Life demonstrated a new approach. Classical influence as texture, not identity. The genre blend was structural, not decorative.
Forever, not for better.
Martin proved that studio technique could change how an instrument is perceived without announcing itself. The listener hears elegance, not process. This track showed how modern pop could absorb classical ideas quietly and permanently. Number 5. Eleanor Rigby, 1966.
Look at all the lonely people.
Eleanor Rigby represented one of the most radical production decisions in pop music of the 1960s. There are no guitars, no bass, no drums, no rhythm section of any kind, only voices and strings. George Martin arranged the song for a string octet, 4 violins, 2 violas, 2 cellos, recorded with close, aggressive microphone placement. This was deliberate. Instead of using strings to soften the track, Martin used them to create tension.
Picks up the rice in the church where a wedding.
The influence came from Bernard Herrmann's film scores, not from traditional pop orchestration. The strings are dry, sharp, and rhythmically driven. They stab rather than flow. The arrangement replaces the role of a rhythm section by providing pulse through repetition and articulation. Martin also imposed strict performance rules: minimal vibrato, no romantic phrasing. Every note was controlled. The goal was clarity and impact, not beauty. From a production standpoint, Eleanor Rigby redefined the function of orchestral instruments in popular music. Strings were no longer background decoration or emotional padding. They became the entire foundation of the track. Equally important was what Martin chose to exclude. Adding drums would have made the song conventional. Adding bass would have softened its severity. Martin understood that restraint was essential to the song's identity. The result was a pop single built entirely on classical instrumentation, released without explanation and without apology. After Eleanor Rigby, orchestral arrangements in rock were no longer experimental additions. They were legitimate structural choices. George Martin did not expand the sound of the Beatles here. He replaced it. Number 4. I Wanna Hold Your Hand, 1963.
Tell you something. I think you'll understand.
I Wanna Hold Your Hand marked the moment where the Beatles' sound became technically unified and commercially unstoppable. From a production perspective, George Martin viewed this song as a breakthrough in cohesion. Every element, rhythm, harmony, melody, and vocal arrangement, was designed to lock together with precision. Nothing dominates, nothing drifts. The defining feature is the vocal construction. Lennon and McCartney's call and response lines are tightly synchronized, creating constant forward motion. Martin ensured the harmonies were recorded clean and balanced, avoiding the raw looseness of their earlier singles. The result was a vocal sound that felt confident, controlled, and immediately accessible. Instrumentally, the track is driven by a firm rhythmic foundation. Ringo Starr's drumming is restrained but exact, emphasizing the backbeat without drawing attention. The guitars are bright and percussive, cutting through the mix without distortion or excess. Martin's key production choice was clarity. The mix is punchy and direct, designed to translate across radios, jukeboxes, and live performances. This was not experimentation. It was optimization. I Want to Hold Your Hand was engineered for impact. Its structure is compact, its hook arrives early, and its energy never drops. Martin understood that technical unity could amplify emotional effect. The result was a song that crossed borders effortlessly. It did not just succeed in Britain, it conquered America. For George Martin, this was the moment the Beatles stopped being a successful band and became a global standard for modern pop production. Number 3. Tomorrow Never Knows, 1966. Tomorrow Never Knows represents George Martin's most radical departure from conventional recording practice. The song is built almost entirely on studio manipulation. Instead of traditional arrangement, Martin and the band constructed the track using tape loops, short segments of sound played continuously and layered live during the mix. These loops included altered instruments, distorted voices, and abstract noises, all synchronized manually across multiple tape machines.
It is not dying.
John Lennon's vocal was another technical breakthrough. Rather than a clean lead vocal, Martin routed Lennon's voice through a Leslie speaker, normally used for organs. This decision transformed the vocal into a rotating mechanical texture that matched the song's hypnotic rhythm. It was not decoration, it was structural. The instrumental foundation is deliberately static. Ringo Starr maintains a single, unchanging drum pattern throughout the song. Martin recognized that variation would weaken the effect. Consistency allowed the experimental elements to take control. Backward guitar parts and reversed tape effects further broke the rules of pop recording. Sounds were treated as raw material, not performances. The studio became the instrument. With Tomorrow Never Knows, Martin helped establish principles that define modern music production. Repetition as power, texture as composition, and technology as a creative partner. This track did not just push boundaries, it replaced them. Number 2, A Day in the Life, 1967.
Read the news today, oh boy.
A Day in the Life is the clearest example of George Martin redefining what a pop song could contain. The track combines two unfinished compositions, John Lennon's detached verses and Paul McCartney's brisk middle section. Martin's role was to make them coexist without compromise. The solution was structural, not decorative. Instead of smoothing the contrast, Martin emphasized it.
About a lucky man who made the grade.
The most radical element is the orchestral build. Martin instructed a full orchestra to move from their lowest note to their highest, without strict notation. This controlled chaos was designed to create tension, not harmony. It broke classical rules while using classical musicians. Technically, the orchestral sections were recorded in multiple passes and combined to amplify scale. Martin treated the orchestra as a sound mass rather than a traditional ensemble. There was no precedent for this in pop music. Ending a chart-bound song with unresolved orchestral noise and a prolonged decay was commercially risky. For Martin, this track proved the studio could unify contradiction, order and chaos, intimacy and scale, discipline and experimentation. A Day in the Life did not expand pop music, it reset its limits. Number 1. Strawberry Fields Forever, 1967.
Let me take you down, 'cause I'm going to.
George Martin described Strawberry Fields Forever as the moment the Beatles made a radical change in musical direction. The problem was structural. John Lennon preferred the first take, sparse, dreamlike, and intimate. Paul McCartney favored the second version, heavier, orchestral, and more elaborate. Normally, this would mean choosing one and discarding the other. Martin did neither. The result is a seamless transition that sounds intentional, even though it merges two incompatible performances. The song shifts character midstream without warning, creating a sense of dislocation that perfectly matched Lennon's lyrics. Beyond the edit, Martin treated the studio as a compositional tool. Mellotron lines, backward recordings, and unconventional instrumentation were layered with strict control. Nothing was accidental. Every effect served structure, not novelty. This track abandoned the idea of capturing a performance. It embraced construction. Martin later referred to this edit as a technical miracle, not because it was flashy, but because it solved a creative deadlock through engineering. With Strawberry Fields Forever, production stopped supporting the song. It became part of the song itself. From this point forward, modern music production had a new rule. If the idea cannot be performed, it can still be built.